Just a couple of reminders before I begin in prayer. This series is an attempt to provide educational opportunity for our congregation to hear different perspectives and different points of view. Certainly with any of these weeks, it doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything that you hear, but this is a chance for us to hear from different people, to look at how we can continue to listen to each other, lead when it comes to race relations. And tonight, obviously, we're going to be hitting on a number of different topics, including race relations, criminal justice system, life change, turnaround, all kinds of things. So let me start with a word of prayer, and then we'll get going tonight. Gracious God, be with us again as we have another dialogue. Thank you for Charles and for Cyntoia, their willingness to come and share. Open our hearts and minds that we can grow, that we can learn from each other. In Christ's name, amen. There's a great book that came out, I believe it was last year. Charles gave me a copy of it, but it's a memoir called Free Cyntoia. And what I would like to do before I turn it over to Charles Bone is I want to read to you from the introduction, and then I'm going to let him take it from there. This is a powerful book if you want to get it. My knees shook as I stood in the courtroom. Any moment now, the jury would file in. 12 men and women had spent the last 6 hours debating whether I should spend the rest of my life behind bars. I'd sat in the Davidson County Courthouse holding cells, staring at the cinder blocks, reading the names of men and women etched on the walls, the metal bench pressed into my back, but I barely noticed. My mind was busy playing the same scene over and over. The last 5 days of testimony went by in slow motion. Did that juror smile at me? I wondered. What were they thinking then? Are they on my side? I'm gonna fast forward to a later part. The juror came back. Tension radiated throughout the room. I stared the lady down, waiting for her to read the words that I dreaded for months. We, the jury, found the defendant, Cyntoia Denise Brown. She paused again, but it seemed like hours. Count one, guilty first-degree murder. I flinched. Her words carried the weight of condemnation. I felt like she'd confirmed I was a monster, a murderer, a whore. Count two, guilty, felony murder. Pause. Count three, guilty, especially aggravated robbery. I didn't have to wait for the judge to read the sentence I already knew. Everyone did. First-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence in the state of Tennessee. I was still just a teenager. I'd never had a driver's license, never been to prom, never voted. God, I said, back in my cell, curled up in my yellow jumpsuit, if you let me out of here, I'll tell the whole world about you. And that's again from this memoir that was published last year. Charles, thanks for doing this. Cyntoia, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Well, thanks for keeping me.
Everybody, please mute if you can, except for Charles and Cyntoia.
Thanks, Clay. And it's a real honor for me to be with you all because of how much I love this church and how much I appreciate what's going on at Woodmont Christian, and especially this series. My real reason for loving this church is the fact that all of my grandchildren attend Woodmont Christian, and that is a great draw, even though the preaching is wonderful. So thank you all for having me. It's also a great honor for me to be here with Cyntoia. You're going to get to hear in person a real amazing story tonight, and have an opportunity to see the type of person that she is and what she has become. And I'm going to ask her to tell you about Cyntoia Brown that Clay just read to you about in 2006 when she was sentenced to life imprisonment. And then I'm going to ask her to tell you about Cyntoia Brown Long and who she is now and what she's doing because she has been freed. She was a captive and she has been freed. We prayed a lot during the process that we were going through with the clemency hearing about Luke 4:18, and we're so thankful for Governor Haslam, and I'm sure Cyntoia will have an opportunity to mention that. let me just say, I became aware of this story in 2010. She'd already been convicted. All of her appeals had been exhausted, and the only avenue for additional relief was what we call a post-conviction relief petition. So we went through 10 years. We were still in the courts at the time Governor Haslam made his decision. But when I heard the story in 2010, I was moved by what I heard and why she would be declared to be the criminal and not the victim. And you'll hear why she became over those period of 10 years recognized as the victim by so many people. So I want to just introduce Cyntoia. Cyntoia, tell them who you were in your teenage years, and then tell them who you are now and what transpired along the way. I'll probably interrupt somewhere there because it's not just about Cyntoia and about me and about Bill Haslam. It's about a lot of people who reached out to help and to recognize the need for Cyntoia to be freed. So Cyntoia, thank you for being here, and take it away.
Well, to be honest with you, 16-year-old Cyntoia didn't know who she was at all. By the time that I was arrested and convicted, this was the end of a journey that had started long before I had ever run away, long before I was ever living on the streets, in that lifestyle that led to me being incarcerated. When I think of the first time that, the issue of who I was and that issue of identity really came up was when I was 5 years old. My very first day of school, our parents brought us into the classroom. They started to talk with my teacher, and I went to go meet my classmates. And within 10 minutes of me sitting there and meeting them, the question came up of why I didn't look like my parents. It's not something that I had ever given any thought to. My family had never made me feel any different from them. I never really know that I didn't fit there with them or look like them. But in that moment, I looked at my parents, and they were both dark skinned, and I looked down at my own light skin, and this confusion really started to set in. Why don't I look like them? Who am I? And I wasted absolutely no time when my mother came to pick me up from school asking her why I didn't look like her and my dad. She told me then that I was adopted and that they had taken me in from a white woman who couldn't take care of me. And she tried to reassure me that I was beautiful and that I was loved and I belonged there. I was part of the family, but I couldn't hear any of that. All I heard was that I didn't fit, was that I didn't belong. And there was this question, well, who am I? And where do I fit? What followed then was these years in school where I always felt that I was different from everyone else. In every social situation, in my church, I went to a Black church, I felt like I didn't fit there. I felt like I didn't fit with my friends. So in every situation, I automatically distinguished myself from everyone else, and I really felt like an outcast. In school, I started having this chip on my shoulder, and the teachers, they picked up on it. I was branded a problem fairly early on, and the smallest little eye roll or smart remark, not wanting to participate in class, any little thing that I did, I was sent to the principal's office, which only further made me feel that I wasn't wanted and I didn't belong. So I would get sent to the principal's office, would get sent to in-school suspension, ended up suspended, and eventually I was expelled from public school for bringing a bottle of no-dose pills, which are just caffeine pills. You can get them at the store just like you could Tylenol or aspirin. I brought those for show and tell, and I was actually expelled under the school's zero tolerance policy. Whenever you're expelled from public school, you're sent to alternative school. In alternative school, I was surrounded by kids who had already been involved with the justice system in some form or another. For the small few that hadn't, they were well on our way. And it took me less than 6 months from the time that I actually entered alternative school for me to wind up in juvenile court. And my charge partners were 3 of the kids that I had actually met at the school. And what I found was that although these were kids that had been kicked out of school, they had been in trouble, they did some things that I had never been raised to do, I felt comfortable with them because I felt like I was accepted. And it was from meeting them, it was from living life in facilities that I ended up living on the run around this group of people, just to be frank with you, where drugs and promiscuity kind of reigned supreme. And that's where I was by the time that I was 16 years old and ended up finding the man who would come to be my trafficker.
Charles, you're muted right now. Sorry.
There, as you know, she was arrested after this terrible scene where this man picked her up for sex when she was 16 and took her to his house, and out of some incredible fear that she had that he was going to do something to her, she used the gun that her pimp had given her to kill him. She was convicted, as you've read in the book, Clay, and sent to prison. And Cyntoia, you want to pick up the story there, or do you want to comment at all about any of the circumstances of the trial at this point?
I mean, yeah, that's fine. As you said, you know, from me meeting my trafficker, I was meeting different men who would pick me up for sex. One of the men who had picked me up, 43-year-old man, he picked me up, took me to his house, felt really uncomfortable, and I ended up shooting him. I was arrested, charged with murder, and actually convicted. But, you know, during that whole period of time, the talk wasn't about me being trafficked. The talk wasn't about any of the feelings that I may have felt. The talk wasn't about what could have led me to be in the situation where here I was a child, alone with a 43-year-old man. And not only that, why did I feel this fear? What was it that caused me to always fear being assaulted, being attacked? What was it that was going on? Because normal 16-year-olds don't end up in this situation, right? What am I doing even on the streets of Nashville? There was no conversation about that. As a matter of fact, the prosecutor at that time had painted me as a prostitute. Back in 2004, trafficking wasn't part of our vocabulary. When you thought of trafficking, you thought about Asian girls in vans who were being snatched off the streets and sold here in America. We've come a long way since, but unfortunately at my trial, we weren't there yet. So when I was tried, that was the rhetoric that was used. When I was tried, I was painted as this horrible villain that the streets needed to be protected from. And at the end of the day, I didn't get a say. I didn't testify in my trial. And all the jury really saw was some of the worst things that the prosecutor could come up with. And I ended up being convicted and sentenced to 51 years in prison.
So let's move to prison. There are a lot of events there. I see one of your first angels is actually with us this evening that Connie Seabrooks has joined. You might describe your experiences early on in prison, and then how Ms. Seabrooks rescued you and moved you toward another angel who's here representing Lipscomb. So you want to pick the story up there?
Sure. So whenever I was first sentenced and told that I was going to spend the rest of my life as I knew it in prison, and my life as I knew it was pretty much over, I hadn't even really begun to live. I had never had a driver's license. I couldn't vote. I couldn't purchase alcohol. I couldn't do any of the things that you would think of an adult would be able to do. But here I was in this adult situation. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of frustration. I had a lot of unresolved trauma that I had carried with me. And still, I really didn't know who I was. I didn't have any sense of my true identity. So when I first went into the prison, naturally, I ended up going crazy. I ended up getting into trouble. I was constantly having verbal altercations with staff members and other inmates, and just really lost. I ended up being put on maximum security because I was having so many issues, and I spent about a year there in solitary confinement. And this is after coming off of 2 years solitary confinement just because I was a juvenile. And, at this point, I wanted to do something better. I wanted to do something that was different from everything else that I had done in my life. I was tired of the way I kept ending up in these situations. I was tired of constantly disappointing my mother. I was tired of constantly disappointing myself. And I said I wanted to do something different. I heard about a college program that was offered there at the prison, and I signed up for it. I knew that the stipulations had said, you have to be right up free, you have to be a certain custody level, and I did not meet any of the requirements. But that didn't matter to me. I wanted it, and I figured at that time all they can do is tell me no, but I'm going to show them that I want it. The person in charge of actually screening people who wanted to be part of the program was a woman by the name of Connie Seabrooks. And she was the director of the education department there. And, she let me know, you don't really meet the requirements for this, but she saw my potential. She saw my test scores, and she saw something in me that only God could have allowed her to see, that told her, I'm going to give this girl a chance. And she actually waited until the day that I got off security to give the results to everyone who had made it into the classes. She put it off so that I could be included, so that I would be eligible. And she gave me that chance. And ever since she gave me that chance, I did not look back. I realized, this was the first time since I had been caught up in the justice system, even caught up in the school system, that someone had really seen potential in me and had taken a chance on me, and I wasn't going to let her down. Whenever I got into the Lipscomb classroom setting, there I met even more people who saw something in me worth salvaging, who saw something in me, that they believed in, and they were willing to invest money, invest time, invest their energy to really just let that blossom. And that was just so overwhelming for me, coming from the situation that I had come from. I came from the streets where a man was constantly telling me that I was nothing, that I would never be anything, that no one would ever see anything in me. I came from the justice system, who only saw me as the worst thing that I had ever done, and made me believe that that's all that I would ever be, that I would never be nothing more than that. But while I was there in the Lipscomb classroom, I was able to just grow in ways that I never thought were possible for me. I discovered things about myself, about my strengths and problem solving and organization. Pretty much anything that you put in front of me, I would ace it. I ended up getting a 4.0 GPA in every single class that I took. And by the time that I walked out of prison, I had not only an associate's degree, but a bachelor's degree.
And the life program at Lipscomb, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is certainly something you should investigate. And as a matter of fact, Kate Watkins, who runs that program, has joined us tonight as well. She's beaming. If you see her on the screen, you'll see that she's proud of her star pupil celebrity, but she's proud of all of the students who've been there, and it's been a very, very, very successful program. So, Cyntoia, I'm trying to get move through this, and don't let me leave something out. There were so many people there from Lipscomb. Richard Good, Rubel Shelley. Rubel Shelley, by the way, Clay tried to give her a B on one exam, and Centolia challenged him and took it to him, and he changed his mind. But Preston Shipp was there as a speaker and as a teacher. And there's just so many people who need to be thanked who were a part of what happened to her. Pick up the story there, Cyntoia, in terms of how you developed your ambition for what you are now looking at doing, and then we'll come back and talk about Governor Haslam. But I think, the fact that you developed your idea of what you want to do now while you were in that Lipscomb program is really important.
Sure. So as part of the Lipscomb curriculum, we have what was called a capstone project. It was a necessary part of the degree that I was going after. And in the capstone project, our teacher said, let's think about everything, not only that you've learned through your education journey, but your life's journey. Let's think about everything that you've learned. Let's think about what you feel called to do. What is your vocation? What is it that you can take away from your life and give back? And I started to look over my life, and I saw this constant theme of, my identity and my confusion with what my identity was. And so many people telling me who I was and what I was and where that was coming from. And there was this common thing that I saw with all these unhealthy attitudes about relationships, all these unhealthy understandings of sexuality. And that really played a role in me ended up in a situation where I felt that, whatever relationship that I had was automatically going to be transactional. And it was always going to involve me giving way more of myself than I could ever get in return from that individual that I was involved with. And I was a child who thought it was completely acceptable, who was told by adults who were around me that it was completely acceptable for adult men to court me, to have relationships with me. And I started to look, in our culture, and I saw how that idea is still supported. We still see this sexualization of young girls. We still see so many people who are afraid to speak up about how our culture really impacts young girls and their unhealthy understandings of relationships. And we've really moved away from what God has intended. And I just felt that there needs to be some kind of campaign, some kind of social norms overhaul of that if we're ever going to combat the epidemic of youth sex trafficking. There has to be someone who steps up and says, number one, this is what sex trafficking is. And number two, this is what is making it worse. The things that we're doing, the things that we're exhibiting to these young girls is making it worse. And, we have the power to stop it, and we need to start having this conversation. And so from that, the Glitter Project was born, which is the grassroots learning initiative on teen trafficking, exploitation, and rape. And that's a campaign that we're working on now with a nonprofit that I started with the help of you, Mr. Bone, and the wonderful people at Vanderbilt.
So we'll come back to the nonprofit, because I know all of you all will want to make a contribution to Cyntoia's foundation to help her by the time this is over. But we reached a really important place in mid 2018, where we knew that Governor Haslam had a year and a half left in his position as governor of Tennessee. And if we were going to ask for a clemency, we needed to get started. Before we could in order to get started, I don't know whether she's joined us or not, but we asked Lipscomb to nominate a student to help us kind of coordinate all of our efforts. And Gabby Canone was nominated by Lipscomb to help us and jumped in and helped us prepare the clemency application. Gabby is now in law school at Belmont. And I say these names because I think it's so important for you all to understand how many people invested their lives in Centolia and in what she was attempting to accomplish with her life. And so we were surprised at Thanksgiving in 2018 when without us knowing what was going to happen, Channel 17 did a story about Cyntoia. There's been a lot of publicity, as some of you all know, about her during the years of her imprisonment. But Channel 17 did a story that got picked up by the national press, and hundreds of celebrities picked up the story, led by Kim Kardashian, and began a hashtag campaign on Twitter called They have more followers than either Clay or Charles Robert Bone on Twitter, and their Twitter tag was hashtag Free Cyntoia Brown, and we had actually celebrities that I'd never heard of. I knew there was a Kim Kardashian out there, but I didn't know about Drake or T.I., or I didn't know much about Rihanna. I obviously knew who LeBron James were, but all of these celebrities who heard the story began this campaign. And Kim Kardashian's lawyer actually called me and said, "So what can we do to help? There's been a lot of publicity about this." And I said, "I am so thankful that you are interested in Centolia. But let me tell you our dilemma. Our dilemma is that we are approaching and asking for relief from a white, Republican, conservative, Southern governor who probably has very little appreciation for the celebrities who are beginning to tell this story around the world." So I said, I don't think Drake, for example, called, and I never told Cyntoia that he wanted to come to the prison and actually go to see her. And I said, "Yeah, I just think we need to wait until she's out and you can have her at one of your concerts." But she was quite the celebrity there, and we worked on the petition and had just an incredible amount of support. But the people who really made a difference with Governor Haslam were Cyntoia herself, Connie Seabrooks, who went with us to the governor's office to speak to. She had retired by then, and she wanted to actually go with us and speak to the governor's lawyer about what she saw in Centolia. And, you know, there were Professor Good from Lipscomb went with us as well. And, you know, they told the story about what they had seen in the transformation of this young woman to become such a person that she was. And so we had no idea what Governor Haslam was going to do. And yes, 10 days before he left office, and he decided to provide clemency to her after 15 years, which was August the 7th of last year, and say that she could be released from prison as long as she would be on probation for another 10 years. And since that time, you've seen the book that Cyntoia has written, and she's spoken around the United States, and I'll let her tell you some of the places that she's been to tell her story. She's been on all the major networks telling her story, and a part of that story is another person who scared us to death because he surprised us. He didn't surprise Cyntoia, but he surprised us when he came on the scene, and that is her current husband, Mr. Long. You want to tell that story, Cyntoia?
That is my absolute favorite part of the story, so I would love the story. And that's very relevant. So you just sat and you told everyone, you know, the physical manifestation of everything that was happening with my clemency battle. But Jamie, he's actually part of that whole spiritual side of what was happening. And this is really when things came full circle with me and my entire identity struggle. When I met Jamie, my very last appeal had been denied. It was the federal habeas corpus. It was denied, and the federal court said I could not appeal it. That was the end of the road for my appeals. And so whenever he wrote me, he said, the Lord said to me that you're getting out of prison. Not only did he say that, but he also said at the bottom of his letter, free Cyntoia, and put the hashtag 2017. Now, this is in January of 2017, before any of the stuff that you had talked about with the hashtag, with all the viral stuff happened. That happened in November. And so he wrote me this, and, I wrote him back. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. My last appeal was denied, but okay, sure, go ahead. And he just continued to write me. And I told him that I didn't believe in God, because by this time I had become so angry. I was raised in the church, and, I had this idea of how things should work. What I knew was about religion. And I felt that if I did certain things and I prayed in a certain way, then whatever I ask is going to be given to me, because that's just always how I thought it worked. That's not how it works. God is not a genie in a bottle. It doesn't work like that. As a matter of fact, whenever I was, going through Lipscomb and working with Connie Seabrook, she had actually told me that I would not be set free until I came to Jesus. And I remember telling her, at this point I was feeling myself, doing so well in school. I was so intelligent. I was studying case law. I was working closely with my attorneys. I had 7 of the best attorneys that money could buy. And, praise God, they were all working for free. And I said, you know what, that's not how this works, Miss Seabrooks. What's going to happen is my attorneys are going to deliver a great appeal, and that's how that's going to work. That's how the law works. God has nothing to do with this. I don't believe in God. She said, you mark my words. Until you come to Jesus, you will not be free. So fast forward to me meeting Jamie and me telling him I don't believe in God. And he lets me know that's because you haven't met his son, Jesus. Jamie starts introducing me to the concept of having a relationship with Jesus. He forced me to really look back over my entire identity struggle, how I struggled to find some identity that was informed by my race, that was informed by my family, that was informed by the social circles that I found myself in, that was informed by my abilities, that was informed by, what other people thought of me, and how every time I based my sense of self, my sense of identity in those things, I always ended up lost. I always ended up unsure of who I was, unsure of my place in life, and I never really felt fulfilled. And he assured me that if I gave just a fraction of my attention, of my time, getting to know Jesus, getting to know the Word, reading the Word, spending time just praying with him, talking with him, that I was experiencing fulfillment unlike anything that I had ever experienced before. And at this point in my life, why wouldn't I try him? I had tried everything else and it had failed. And that was hands down the best decision I'd ever made, because I learned that Jesus never fails. When man fails me, he never will. And my sense of identity, just knowing that I'm a child of God, that my identity comes from him and everything else is secondary, it enables me to do the work that I'm doing now. It enables me to withstand everything, because life has not been a cakewalk since I've become saved, but having my identity rooted in him has made everything else bearable. It's made everything else just flow through that. And, it's enabled me to successfully reintegrate. So once I met him and I started focusing on praying, I started focusing on building a relationship with him. I stopped worrying about what the appeal was. I stopped worrying about what my attorneys were going to do. I stopped worrying about what the system had said. And that is when God showed up, and he actually opened up that appeal that was closed. I remember when you had told me that the federal court reopened that appeal, we were all surprised. It's not something that happens. It's not something that's really heard of. But I just remember rejoicing, and I called Jamie and I said, the appeal has been reopened. And all he said was, why are you surprised? because he was so assured in his faith that he never doubted that God was going to do exactly what he said he was going to do. But for me, it was new for me to really just experience this concept of the things that were happening in the spiritual realm having actual manifestations in the physical realm. And so to see that just blew my mind. So here we are. We filed the clemency for the governor. We have the appeal going on, but we're waiting, and we have no word whether the parole board is even going to give me a hearing. In the state of Tennessee, less than 1% of applications ever get a hearing before the parole board when it comes to clemency. So we know that, this is a straight uphill battle, and I'm not letting myself get worried about that. Me and Jamie are just praying. We're praying that God's will be done. We're praying that God touches the heart and minds of every person that comes into contact with this petition. We're praying that he especially touches the heart and mind of Governor Haslam, because as you said, this was a man who was a white, conservative, Republican governor, and that's just not somebody that you hear of taking a shot on a convicted murderer and giving them a second chance at freedom, because that's what I was on paper. That's what I was before man, before the courts. But we knew that God can turn that all around. The Holy Spirit actually spoke to my husband and said that he was going to, and I held on to that. For months, we heard nothing, and then finally, we got the word that we were getting the hearing. That was the last day in March of 2018. We had the hearing May 2018, and I remember when you and Gordon and you guys had come up to the prison, and you were trying to run me through, what was it that I was going to say before the parole board, because this is a really important hearing, and whatever I say here could determine their recommendation to the governor, could ultimately determine whether or not he's going to grant me. And I just remember praying over what I'd read. When you go before the court, when you go before these individuals, don't think about what you say, because the Holy Spirit will give you the words. And I remember telling you that. I remember telling, Jay Houston Gordon that, Ed Yarbrough, and you guys looked at me like I lost my mind. I said, don't worry. It's okay. God's got it. And, I just stayed in that place whenever people were telling me about odds and, worst case scenarios. Oh, he could just cut your sentence down to 30 years. I just shot back, that's not what God said. God said I was going to be freed, and I believe in what he said. And I kept having that faith. Months go by, nothing, no word. Then out of nowhere, like you said, here we are, and he grants me clemency. Not only does he grant me clemency, but he grants for me to be released that year. And I could do nothing but praise God.
Well, it's a beautiful story, as you all have heard, and it's more amazing, really, to hear Governor Haslam tell it, because when we, most of you all will know the Bones are Democrats. When we first went to meet with him, he said, just the lawyers were in the room, and he said, well, why? He said, I know we're here. Some of us have different political views, but why should I consider Centolia and not others in this system? Because there are a lot of Centoias in the system. And I basically said to Governor Haslam, it's not about politics. It's about what she has accomplished and how she has reframed her entire being as a part of the prison system and what she's accomplished through her education. And I said to Governor Haslam, if there are others in the system who have done as well as Cyntoia has done, let them all out. Let the ones out who deserve to be freed, and work with them. And he really, he's told us since then, he really agonized over it. He prayed about it. He told us that it was really a matter of faith for him. And tell us, Cyntoia, about the visit. This is extraordinary. The visit that he and Mrs. Haslam made to you after he left office while you were still in prison.
Yes. So this was about, I think, 3 months before I was scheduled to be released. He was no longer in office. And I remember thinking when they said the governor was coming to see you, the former governor, I was thinking he was going to come up in these black trucks and he's going to be escorted, by security. But when he came up, he was driving his own vehicle. He just hopped out, was normal, humble, by himself, him and his wife. And I was just so taken with how humble they were, how kind they were. And you could just really just see just Christ just glowing from them. And, we sat and we talked, and what he kept saying was he felt the Lord calling him. He felt his hand in the whole situation, and he just felt God in the situation, and that is what informed him. And I remember thinking, this is what we need in our leaders. Every time we have these elections, we hear these leaders talk about, their faith and how they're Christian, but is it informing your decisions as a leader? Is your faith informing who you are as a man? Are you a man of God first and a governor second? And for me to see him do that was just incredible. He didn't care what was political. He didn't care about the ramifications that was going to have. He just knew that God was calling him to do the right thing. And, that stuck with me. I had an opportunity to meet with him since I've been free. My husband and I had dinner with him, and just an incredible man.
Thank you. So let me shift then to the message that you're carrying forth since you have left prison, Cyntoia, and the issues that you see out there in our criminal justice system, and how that relates to adverse childhood experiences, how that relates to racial issues, how that becomes a part of the problem that we have in terms of sex trafficking. What is the message you're carrying now? And tell this audience some of the places you have been to speak in person before March and since March by Zoom, or I think you actually made a personal appearance in Nebraska last week. So tell them the message you're delivering when you have the opportunity to speak to audiences throughout the country.
Ooh, how much time do you have?
Well, you've got 5 minutes to answer that question.
When we're talking about reform, I don't even have enough time to talk about, the message that I have. But number one, if I have to think of overall, we need to start treating people how God says we should treat people. When you're sitting in that judge's seat, you should treat the child that comes before you as if they were your own child. Too many times what we see is people throwing people away. We're not disposable. That's not the human experience. That's definitely not how the Lord calls us to treat one another. People are capable of redemption. People are capable of changing. People are capable of growing. And I would love to see more of that compassion, more of that mercy within our justice system. What we're seeing now is sentences that are extreme. They're ridiculous. The amount of years that we give people in this state alone for the crimes, the amount we give juveniles, when the Supreme Court has already said that juveniles and adults are not the same in terms of culpability. However, we sentence them the same. We sentence children to 60 years in prison. It's just not in keeping with, number one, science. Number two, it's not in keeping with, what a person of faith should do and how we should conduct ourselves when we're put in these positions and trusted into these positions of leadership. So I definitely want to see that change. And, in terms of trafficking, I want to see it change where, number one, let's stop calling young girls promiscuous. Let's stop calling young girls fast. Let's stop calling young girls prostitutes, because that's not what they are. Let's stop putting all of the things on these children that we should be holding adults accountable for. I don't even have enough time, Mr. Bone, to tell you all of the things that, I have learned to speak up and advocate for, from my experience. And I've been able to go before groups of legislators, before groups of policymakers, within institutions, educators, colleges, students, so many different people the Lord has taken me before, to just be able to talk about my experiences. And, there's so many different takeaways, but my biggest takeaway is, let's let our faith guide us, and let's let the Lord guide us.
Well, this is a great, touching, inspiring story, as you all have heard. And I wanted to leave time, Clay, for questions. And certainly, as you can tell, Cyntoia could speak much longer about a lot of these issues. But I wanted to see if we could at least kind of introduce her, her story to your audience if they haven't read the book. And you can Google Cyntoia Brown, Cyntoia Brown Long on your internet, and find amazing stories. The one that I recommend the most is one she did for CBS last fall, which was a letter to my 16-year-old self. So you can find that very easily by Googling Cyntoia Brown and CBS. So can I turn it back over to you, Clay, and let you see if there's some questions that we might ask.
Cyntoia, thank you so much for sharing with us. Charles, thank you for having the dialogue and asking the questions. We really appreciate it. Cyntoia, I want to ask you a question, and then I'm gonna open it up and try to call on a few other folks. But the task force that we have at Woodmont that's been working on racial reconciliation, there is a lot of talk about the criminal justice system and the need for reform. And there's obviously a lot of talk about the role that race plays in the criminal justice system, and especially right now with what's going on in our country with police brutality and with just everything that's happening. Do you have any general observations about? I mean, you can kind of continue the road you were going down, but about criminal justice reform as it relates to race, but also, I guess the question I would say is the one that Governor Haslam asked Charles Bone and his team. There are other people that have been convicted, maybe not as early as you were, who've worked to turn their life around. So how do we, get to a place where we grant some clemency and freedom, and well-deserved, and others that maybe have done as much work don't get that chance? So anything you want to add about the criminal justice system, what's fair and not fair, and then any observation about the role that race plays in that process?
Okay, so that's a good question. So, I get that a lot. We hear a lot of talk about, the role that race plays in injustice within the system. And there definitely is that. But I will also tell you that I was incarcerated with a great number of white women who were railroaded and who experienced injustice because they couldn't afford representation, because of their social stature, because of the fact that they were a woman. So race is not the only thing that ends up putting us on the short end of the stick when it comes to justice. And what I see is a lot of times people like to put individuals in different classes. And for some reason, they feel that certain classes of individual are not deserving of justice. They're not deserving of compassion. They're not deserving of mercy. They're disposable. Mm-hmm. And that's just not how it should be. I feel that, you know, a lot of people, they make idols of their social statute, of their race, of their class. And they see everything through that lens. And if you don't fit in that lens, if you don't fit in that mold, then, you know, you're just not a priority. You're not that important. Fairness doesn't apply to you. And that's definitely not how it should be. That's not how, you know, the Constitution says it should be. And that's not how Jesus said it should be. So again, like when we challenge ourselves to actually walk the walk and live by how the Lord calls us to live, we're not going to be having these conversations. When we can be bold enough to say, you know what, no, as a woman of faith, I'm not going to do this because this is unjust. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you say, I have to answer to him. Things are going to be completely different. So there's so many things just within the state of Tennessee, you know, that we could be addressing, that all of you could be addressing with your legislators, with your people in the prison industries. It's a private industry that's here in Nashville. Some of you may know Core Civic, the healthcare companies that actually are contracted to run within the prisons. So many issues that are going on that you could be taking that step and like, what is it that I can do? How is it that I can help? There are many organizations here in the state of Tennessee who can point you in the right direction, let you know. It's not always just about signing petitions. Sometimes it's about having meetings. Sometimes it's about your friend is the guy that runs this food program here at the prison, and you know they're not doing right by them, and maybe you can have that conversation with him. Right now we have legislation that we're trying to pass for juveniles, juveniles that are sentenced to these excessive amounts of time in the prison system. You can sign on to support that bill. You can speak out and let your legislator know that you support that bill. You know, just be bold and actually do something. Don't just let that conviction sit in your spirit without actually acting on it. And the second question you asked was about clemency, correct?
Yeah, so in particular, this idea that there might be other Centolias out there who their crime was a really long time ago and they've changed their life and maybe they've found God and turned it around, but they don't get the chance to have a second start. And that was kind of the part that I was asking.
Well, I can tell you beyond the shadow of a doubt, there definitely are thousands of Cyntoias still in the prison system, still here in Tennessee. I know them personally. Some of them were my role models when me modeling how I was actually going to, you know, serve my time, what I was going to do within that time to better myself. Some of these women are still in there. Erica East, Taronda Williams, I can name them. They can go on and on and on. And these women are there. They have no chance for appeal. They filed for clemency, but they're not necessarily looked at. The solution to that is simple. We need to start looking at their cases. We need to start looking at these individuals. We need to have mechanisms in place where we can review them and we can give them that second chance. You know, it's easy to say, oh, there's so many people who are should be given a second chance, but what are you going to do that? Contact Governor Billy. Let him know you would like to see more people considered for clemency. There are so many people who could be with their families now, who could be assets to the community. You know, if you go into the prison, I don't know if your church ever has, you know, signed up to go through the volunteer services there. You meet these women. It's like you're meeting your neighbor. It's like you're meeting your mother, your sister. There are so many people that are deserving of that second chance.
Yeah, I've always said it's the part of Matthew 25 that we have a hard time living out. We're good at the other parts, feeding, sheltering, visiting the sick, but I was in prison and you visited me. And we do have some folks in our church that do that, but we need to have more.
Yes.
All right, Amber's going to help me. I would like to open it up. Please, if possible, do what I didn't do. Keep your question short, and we'll try to get some in here. So raise your hand on the screen and also on the if you want on Zoom, and I'll call on you. Let's see. Okay, let's go. Betsy Garber.
Hi, thank you for being here. Do you have an opinion on this private prison running core civic or whatever it is? Do you think, I would just like to hear your opinion on that.
So I was actually incarcerated in a CCA run jail. And I can tell you that it was a horrible experience. There was times that, I wasn't fed because they forgot about me. There was times that I wasn't let out of my cell. But that was also back in 2004. I had met with the new CEO of Core Civic. He talked about things that he would like to see changed. I believe that everyone can change. I believe that they have the power to change. Now, actually seeing that take place, that's what's going to be, the kicker. Is it going to happen? Are things going to change? But I'll also let you know that the problems that you hear about within Core Civic prisons is not just specific to them. The TDOC prisons, just by themselves, there are issues. The commissioner of TDOC, he has a lot of work to be doing. He has a lot of work that he needs to do within the prison. With the health system, I can't tell you how bad the health system is in prison. Keeping the inmates safe, just basic needs, basic necessities. So I don't want to just point the finger and say it's Core Civic. There's other people that have responsibilities that aren't necessarily being met, and making sure the prisons are run not just safely, but in a way that's conducive to the rehabilitation of the people who are there.
All right, I have David LaRosa and then Pam Richardson. So David, your question.
Hi, Cyntoia. First, let me say kudos to your husband. It takes a humble heart to hear the counsel of the Holy Spirit. I pray we could only be so attuned to his voice and not dismiss his role in the life of the believer, for I believe he's also God. So my question is, it seems to me you and your husband are in a unique and privileged position as a family for countless young Black men and women to serve as a role model for what God intended from the beginning to be the illustration of union with the Godhead, as Christ himself reminds us in Matthew 19:3-6. What would you tell the young teenagers out there who lack a family structure and are exposed to a panoply of ideologies that, rather than leading them to the knowledge of and relationship with God, do the exact opposite? Thank you, and God bless you.
Yes, so that also, whenever I speak to young people, I also always tell them, about how important it is to find your identity in Christ, because the world is going to tell you all these different things about what is acceptable. They're going to tell you what you should be doing and what's normal. And, that's not the standard that you're called to live by. That's not the standard that's going to count. And that's not the standard that's going to bring you fulfillment. And so, what I do is I just, try my best to be open and transparent and really display, what a kingdom marriage looks like, the happiness that comes with that, the fulfillment of that, and let them know, all of the bad relationships that I was in, all the unhealthy relationships, that came from me going out seeking the things that the world told me that I should be seeking. But, whenever you just sit still and just wait for God to bring that person into your life, and you meet a person where the relationship with God comes first, everything else is going to fall in line.
All right, Pam Richardson.
Hi, Centoria. I am an educator. I teach 17 and 18-year-old high school seniors. And one of the most dismaying things that I observe from them is a sense of hopelessness, that their lives will be better. And I sometimes feel like, in small ways, educators are contributing to that pipeline to prison because of our school systems. What would you say to my seniors who live without hope because of poverty or illness or whatever? And as Christians, what can we do to help those young people?
I would say that I've been there. I've been in those places where, I felt that there was no other side, that, that was just the end, that there was nowhere for me to go. I thought my life was over at the age of 16. And the point is that God has so much more in store for you. He already has your life written out. His will is so much better for you than anything that you can think of. And if you trust it, and if you just focus on him, he'll open doors for you when man shuts them in your face. When man tells you there is no door, when man tells you there's a dead end, all of a sudden he'll open up a window for you to go through. And my thing is just stay focused on him. It sounds so cliche. It's something they probably heard of, and it sounds so basic, but I promise you it really is that simple. And, you know, it was in my late 20s when I actually learned that. But I can't help but think, what if I learned that before? And I know, like in the education system, they frown upon, you know, bringing faith into the classroom. But, you know, there's ways that you can do that. There's ways that you can uplift them. And sometimes all it takes is for you to just go that extra mile as an educator. I can't tell you how impactful it has been for me, the teachers who went that extra mile. I remember them all. I remember every encounter that we had. I remember how, you know, beyond teaching me math, beyond teaching me social studies and spelling, you know, they cared about me as a person. They cared about what I was going through, and they cared about uplifting me and encouraging me. And I've carried that with me, and it goes a long way.
All right. Other questions? I'm scrolling the screen. Amber's helping me. So if you have your hand up, trying to see you. I've only got 9. I've got 9 at a time here. Centolia, let me ask you this while I look for new ones. What are your thoughts about the debate going on in our culture right now regarding the police, and whether the police are respected, or whether everybody's seen police brutality? We know it exists. We also know that that's not every police officer out there. I don't know how you have a civil society if the police become completely demonized. So what thoughts do you have on that topic?
My thoughts are there are issues. There are issues, but those need to be addressed. This is the same thing when we hear the conversation about abolishing prisons, right? Abolishing prisons, defund the police. And it's like, you can't just completely do away with something. You can't just throw something away because it's not working. You have to figure out, what is it that's not working, and how can I fix this? Any person who is quick to act on impulse shouldn't necessarily be given a gun to roam the streets and police the streets, right? There needs to be some kind of training behind that. There needs to be some assessment of what is it that you're training these officers. Like you said, not all of them are bad. So the whole demonizing element of all police are bad, you know, let's do away with them. It's a two-way street. You can't say that about people who are incarcerated. You can't say that, you know, about police. You can't just demonize people and think that fixes the problem. You know, people are way more complex than that. You have to actually put in the time and the effort to figure out, how can we change this from happening? You know, there's going to be some bad apples, and you deal with those as individuals. But completely writing it off and just letting all that, you know, that hate and that fear mongering to just run amok is not helpful to anyone.
Okay. Other questions?
I have one, Ann Cooper. Can you explain more about your foundation?
Absolutely. So the Foundation for Justice, Freedom, and Mercy, we just started within this past year, and our first project is going to be the Glitter Project, which is a public awareness project, has different phases that we're working through, and it's going to be centered on educating the public about what trafficking looks like. A lot of times we think of trafficking as, you know, young girls getting snatched off the streets, and it's not that. It's not that, and it can easily happen to any young girl. And if we're ever going to stop it, if we're ever going to find out, you know, what is it that we could be doing to prevent it at earlier stages, then we have to be clear on what exactly it is. So that's definitely the first phase, and we're going to be implementing that within the next few months. So we're fundraising for that right now to get everything that we need to get that going. But I believe Mr. Bone has the link. If anyone was interested in supporting it, you can also go to our website, which is www.jfamfoundation.org for more information.
Wendell, I see a question that you posted that's for Connie. And Wendell Brown says, with all the different people that are in need, how did you find Centolia? Connie, are you there still? I think you were on the beach when I saw you last. There you are.
I'm here, yes. To answer that question, as Cyntoia said earlier, there are plenty young ladies that are incarcerated. I didn't just find Cyntoia. She was just happened to be one of the people in the prison that I ministered to. So again.
So how did, and you just happened to, what was the connection? So you've ministered to many, but there was a special connection there.
Well, again, when Cyntoia said in school, you may not be able to bring your Bible in school or what have you, but I would have Bible study in my office, and I would invite young women to come to Bible study in my office, for one thing. But Cyntoia and I had talked. She worked for me for a long while. But prior to that, we had just talked. And I knew things were going on with her. And I knew how smart she was, intelligent young lady, and she had a lot of potentials. And so my thing to her, and she had a lot of anger inside. So my thing to her was, put God in your life and let him sort those things out, and everything will, start falling in place. The same thing that she said tonight. I'm just joyful that she said those things. My heart leaped to hear her say that. But that's how. There are plenty more that are still there that I also did the same thing for.
Thank you, Connie, and thanks for joining tonight. Okay, Carolyn Hughes has a hand up.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Cyntoia, for your story, and Charles for helping her out, and for all being there and having this occasion for us to get together. So, Cyntoia, I think it would be really interesting to go back to even before getting in prison and talking about what happened in high school. It seems like high school was not at all helpful, and the zero tolerance program that really forced you out. What could the high school have done differently?
Great question. So I actually didn't spend that much time in high school. I was sent to alternative school and I was just in middle school. So I was only 12 years old when I was first sent to alternative school. And what could they have done different? Where do I start? Number one, I can't remember a time when, early on, when I would have issues that the principal just really sat with me and tried to help me, that we had any kind of person who had any kind of behavioral health training that could help me understand what it was that I was going through. I was having an identity crisis. I was having, all these conflicts that were in addition to all the normal things that kids go through, period, when they're growing up. And I didn't really have anybody to help me sort through that. When my mother was called up to the school and she was looking for answers, she was looking for help, she was pretty much giving nothing. She was told to take me home, and that was that on that. She didn't necessarily know what to do, where to turn. Resources weren't provided. There were no kind of referrals given. All of those things could have been done. And when it comes to high school, I spent most of that time, I was already in a facility by that time, in a state facility in DCS, and I really don't have enough time to sit on here and talk about all the things that DCS could be doing differently.
Clay, let me jump in there for just a minute if I can, because
Sure.
I noticed that Judge Calloway and hopefully Kathy Simbach are both on with us. I'm not sure whether they're still there or not, but we are so fortunate in Nashville to have Sheila Calloway, who's the juvenile judge, and looking for ways to make something better happen with our young people. And if just to acknowledge her, I don't know whether she's still there or not, but she may want to add something about these last 2 or 3 questions if you have time.
We're still here. Both me and Kathy are here together. And just want to say hi to you, hi to Cyntoia, and just love that you're still putting the fight on, and we need to hear your voice so much more, so many other places, so we can feel supported in the work that we're doing. There's so much to just add to everything Cyntoia said, and every child that I see here has so much going on. They have so much potential, first and foremost, and then they have so many issues, so many adverse childhood experiences, so many things that have put them in a position where they've done something devastating. And, you know, our job, when I tell our staff, is that we got to help lift them up and help, you know, bring them out and help give them the tools that they need that they can be successful. And it hurts my heart that we have laws that sometimes require me to do things such as, you know, transfer children to the adult system. It's probably one of the worst laws that we have. And I'm so thankful for Charles and Cyntoia and Baylor and Kathy and all those who are just working their tails off to try and change those laws and make it better and make it so we understand brain science and we understand that children aren't supposed to think like adults and that we have to do a better job as adults to give them that support even when they make mistakes. And so I'm just so happy to see Centolia doing well.
Judge Calloway, can I ask you a question that is very relevant to this particular time right now?
Absolutely.
I know there are other people on this call share this concern, but many of our Metro children have not been in school for 6 or 7 months, and many are concerned about those that don't have support at home to do the distance learning, and then beyond that, and it's a complicated topic. Everybody would acknowledge that. But with COVID, there are a lot of people that really count on school for their structure and for their meals and good on the list. Do you share the concern? I'm not trying to put you in a tough spot, but that with kids being out of school this long, that we're going to see many more behavioral problems because they are not being watched and guided at home.
You know, I absolutely 100% share the concerns. And it's not just with children not being structured, not having everything. It's, you know, children who are actually being abused as well in the homes where the schools were, you know, the #1 reporters of child abuse. Absolutely. We don't see that anymore. We can't see that. And so there are so many things that I think are concerning about our children. The one good thing I can say is that since March, the a number of juvenile arrests has decreased dramatically, like almost, I'm looking at Kathy, 40%. Like 40% is she knows the numbers wonderfully, but, you know, juvenile arrest has decreased significantly during this time period. And that's a wonderful thing. However, there are so many kids that are suffering, and we know that. They're not getting fed. They're not getting medical treatment. They're not getting looked at. And when they do go back to the schools, you know, and I've talked to Dr. Battle a lot, and she totally understands definitely the need to concentrate on the social emotional learning piece of school and to be more restorative and to help her, hopefully all of her principals and all of her teachers understand that when they do go back, that it's a different world for them. And we've all gone through so much trauma. We as adults can kind of deal with it and bring ourselves through that trauma, but the kids can't. And so we've got to be patient with them, and we've got to be loving and kind and understand that this is a difficult time, and it affects them a whole lot more than it affects us.
All right, we have time for probably another question or two before we close it down. So I'd love to, we have this special time with Cyntoia and Charles. Are there other questions that you'd like to raise? Okay, yeah, John Carpenter. You have to unmute, please. John, you got to unmute for us, buddy. Sandra, turn the mute off. Oh. Still can't hear you. Sandra, can you unmute? Or Amber, can you unmute John? Okay. All right. Was there another person that had their hand up? I'm looking. Okay. Cyntoia, any other? Oh, wait, I do see one there. I see, Eli, one of my One of my Vandy students has joined us. Eli, you're on, buddy.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Cyntoia. And thank you for being here and sharing your story with all of us. My question is actually somewhat relevant to the class in which Dr. Stauffer is my professor. We're talking about polarization in politics. What do you think the kind of the best solution is in your mind for how we can bridge the divide between different groups? Since right now it seems to be so hard to be able to accomplish anything, and to be able to make some of these, sweeping prison reforms seem like common sense, but they also seem to be impossible to accomplish in today's political world.
I'm going to be completely honest with you. From me actually having experienced, going around to talk with, legislators, with Baylor, Mr. Bones' daughter, and some other individuals when we were trying to get legislation passed, sometimes you just can't. You can't find a middle ground. And it's just really difficult. In those moments, you just got to pray that, God comes into their heart and just really moves them to make a change, really moves them to have compassion. But, that always doesn't happen. You just have to keep pushing. And then I'll tell you another thing. My mama, when I was growing up, she always taught me there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so just because you're going through one route and it's not working, let's say you're trying to get a bill passed and it doesn't look like it's passing, that doesn't mean it's your only avenue. If you have some people who you're trying to work to get out of prison, you can go through individual, try to get them help, through appellate attorneys. You can go through trying to put together clemency packets. You can try to put together a clemency campaign, organizing people to persuade the governor to grant clemency to this group of people. And, that's just in the prison sense, but, you can really apply that to any area when it comes to politics, when it comes to law, when it comes to business and any institutions. There's always more than one way to skin a cat.
Okay, I think we got John and Sandra unmuted now. So John,
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's a miracle.
Governor Lee has talked about trying to get people back out of prison into vocational situations. What help would there be kind of getting them out of prison, but getting them on the right path?
That's a good question. So there are so many, educational institutions like Lipscomb who would love to help out, and not just with vocation, but with education in general. My going through that educational process is a big reason why I'm able to be successful since I've reintegrated. Lipscomb, I know they're currently trying to raise money to broaden their education program with the LIFE program. But it's definitely necessary for you to have tools. A lot of times when people come to prison, it's because, they don't necessarily have resources. And so maybe they're acting out of trying to feed themselves, to feed their family. They're doing things because they don't know another way. When you teach them another way, when you show them tools to deal with things differently than they dealt with before, that makes all the difference in the world. And actually investing in people to try to help them build themselves up, to change themselves and become a positive contributing member of society, that's the way to go. That's how you actually put restorative justice into practice.
All right. I think we got time for maybe one more before we close it down tonight. Is there any other questions that would like to be asked? Charles Robert, Karen, do either one of you have a question? I see Alan Murphy with his hand up. Just unmute for us, Alan, and you're on.
Yeah, I got it. I guess my question goes back to age, and Pam talked about having the seniors in school that are at a point of hopelessness. So I guess my question becomes, how do we reach those kids early? And I know, Woodmont's been involved with Fall Hamilton and some things there, but how do we reach people before they reach that point of hopelessness? Because that is a place where it's hard to get away from. And You can't do it by yourself. So how do we get there before it gets that far?
So I can't stress to you how important it is, to be active in the lives of the young people around you. And when I say that, I don't just mean your own kids. I mean all the young kids around you. In my community, we have a saying where it takes a village to raise a child. And it truly does. There was times that, I didn't really necessarily want to talk to my mother, and I didn't feel like confiding in her about things. So if I was going through things, if I was having difficulties, I didn't want to have that conversation with her. But there could have been someone at my school. At one point, I had a mentor that was assigned to me where I felt like I could open up to her. And you never know if you're going to be that someone to a kid who's going through something. So be available to the kids in your life, be active in their lives, and always be mindful of what you're teaching them. Always be mindful of what you're showing them, the examples that you're creating, because that's very important too. A lot of the negative understandings about life, about relationships that I picked up were from adults who are around me. So they taught me things like my body was a commodity. I learned that long before I ever met the man who was trafficking me. I picked up all of these negative behaviors from them. So be that person who exhibits positive behaviors, who exhibits that resilience, who exhibits, that sense of responsibility, that sense of, knowing who you are in Christ and the importance of that. And just be mindful of all those things and be very, very present.
Centolia, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We want to have you back again in the future. Charles, thank you for being the connector and for all the work that you did to help her. Again, I'll lift up, this is the memoir, if you're interested in, that I was reading from, that came out last year, I believe. Just to put a plug in for next week, and actually I'm going to give all of you a challenge. Next week we'll be joined by Bernard Lafayette, who was a civil rights icon. He was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s inner circle guys. So he's going to join us next week. And this is the third of the 3 series for this racial reconciliation series. And tonight we covered a lot of ground, and Cyntoia, thank you for that. But I encourage you to reach out to somebody outside of Woodmont. We got some guests tonight, some judges, some Lipscomb folks. We don't want this just to be a Woodmont deal. Reach out to somebody, invite them to join us next week, pass the Zoom link along, because we want to continue the dialogue. We want to continue to have these conversations. And so that's my challenge. We'll be joined by Bernard next Wednesday night.